Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into something, well, I think it feels more relevant than ever in this, hyper-connected world we live in. How do you actually make sense of the sheer volume of information out there? I mean, fields are just exploding with new research, right? And trying to stay on top of the state of the art, it can feel like drinking from a fire hose. So how do you cut through all that noise, figure out what's already known, and then, this is the key part, figure out where your own unique insights actually fit in? So this deep dive is all about mastering the academic literature review. And we want to frame this not as, some dry, dusty academic task, but really as a crucial research method. And honestly, it's kind of a powerful shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to clarify your problem, pinpoint the gap in what we know right now, and then show your unique contribution. That's really the core pathway we're going to explore today. Problem and gap, contribution.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how the literature review itself it's evolved. It's not just a casual look anymore at what's been written. It's become a rigorous methodology in its own right. It gives you this structured path for assessing all the collective evidence out there, and maybe most importantly, for generating completely new insights from it. Think of it like knowing where the edge of knowledge is right now, so you don't, waste your time rediscovering things people already figured out. It's how you stand on the shoulders of giants, as they say.
Oh, I love that image, yeah. It's not just about proving you've read a stack of papers. It's about building this really solid understanding of your topic, developing your own unique angle on a problem, and then zeroing in on your specific research question helps you find exactly what's missing from current knowledge.
Yeah.
A really important intellectual gap, right?
Yeah.
And then you show precisely where your original contribution slots right in. It's like the ultimate launch pad for your own ideas.
Spot on. And our mission today really is to equip you with a practical, step-by-step way to navigate this whole thing. We want to take what can feel like this overwhelming task and turn it into a clear, strategic workflow, giving you the kind of practical tactics and even tools that the experts use.
Okay, let's start defining this research landscape then. It sounds like the core of a good literature review is, well, it's way more than just summarizing what other people have said. It's about creating something new, isn't it?
Precisely. An academic literature review is definitely not just a summary. It's not an annotated bibliography either. The real goal is to integrate and synthesize what you find out there in the literature into something genuinely original. You're not just reporting on findings. You're using those findings to build new frameworks, new perspectives.
So it's kind of like taking all these scattered pieces of a puzzle and putting them together in a way maybe nobody has quite seen before. Okay, that's where it gets really interesting.
Exactly. And the ultimate point, the purpose of any literature review is really to make a contribution. It's often the primary source that shapes your own research question, and it clearly explains why your research problem matters, both in a practical, real-world sense and for advancing the field itself. Ultimately, it explicitly shows how your study, your work, makes a meaningful addition to what's known in your area. New research often contributes by filling a gap, like a lack of information, or maybe addressing the limitations of older studies, or even providing totally new ways to look at old problems.
Right. And I guess there must be different types of literature reviews depending on the kind of contribution you're aiming for.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We can sort of broadly distinguish between, say, a review that's just background for a bigger empirical study, maybe a chapter in your dissertation, and one that is a full standalone research product in itself. Today, we're mostly focusing on that standalone review because that's a rigorous contribution on its own, an integrative review. Its whole purpose is to assess, critique, and synthesize the literature on a topic specifically to help new theoretical frameworks or perspectives emerge. It's really great for, rethinking knowledge in fields that are already quite mature, or for building those initial ideas in brand new emerging areas.
Okay, and what about that gold standard thing I hear people talk about, the systematic review?
Ah, yes, that's the systematic review. It's known for being incredibly transparent and crucially reproducible in how it synthesizes findings. Its main goal is usually to find all the empirical evidence that meets very specific criteria to answer a very particular research question. Super rigorous stuff. And then there are even more specialized types, like meta-analyses for crunching quantitative data together, or meta-ethnographies for synthesizing qualitative studies. Each one is designed for a specific job in pushing knowledge forward. The key thing is just understanding that each type serves a slightly different purpose in finding and tackling those knowledge gaps.
Okay, so connecting this back to the big picture then. Clarifying your problem and finding that gap early on, that's absolutely foundational. It gives you the intellectual lens, right, for everything else you do in your deep dive. And that brings us neatly to the first really crucial phase, planning your search strategy. This isn't just like randomly jumping into databases, is it?
Not at all. No, this phase is all about careful, meticulous preparation, especially if you're aiming for one of those really rigorous reviews, like a systematic one. You actually need a detailed review protocol. Think of it as your blueprint. This document spells out your research questions, your specific criteria for what studies you'll include or exclude, your search strategies, how you'll search, and even how you plan to assess the quality of the studies you eventually find. It's often called a living document, which means it can adapt a bit as you learn more, but having that initial plan is absolutely key for rigor.
Okay, so the very first step in that planning phase is figuring out the right words, right? The search terms, building that keyword map you mentioned.
Exactly. Your keywords need to come directly from your research question. You basically dissect your question into its core concepts, its main ideas. So for instance, if your question is, what factors affect business continuity after a natural disaster? Your main concepts are pretty obviously business, continuity, and natural disaster.
But you can't just stop with those three words, can you? You have to broaden out from there.
Precisely. You then expand from those initial seed terms. You brainstorm synonyms, so business might also be enterprise or firm or organization. For continuity, you might think about related ideas like impact, recovery, resilience. And for natural disaster, you'd want to list specific types: flood, hurricane, earthquake, wildfire, whatever's relevant. This mapping is so crucial because it's your first real step in clearly defining the problem space, which then in turn helps you start to see that potential gap.
Yeah, this isn't just throwing words into a search bar and hoping for the best. This sounds more like being a linguistic detective, building a really precise map to find the treasure you're after. I wonder, though, do we also need to think about how language itself changes, over time?
That's a really sharp point. Yes. You absolutely need to be conscious of how vocabulary shifts. For example, the interstate highway system in the U.S., it used to be officially called the Interstate and Defense Highways. Missing that historical term could mean missing key early documents. And if you're comparing across countries, you have to watch out for regional differences in terminology. Think like eminent domain in the U.S. versus compulsory acquisition elsewhere. Little things like that can trip you up.
Right. Okay, and then to make all those terms actually work together effectively in a database search, that's where Boolean operators come in.
Yes, Boolean operators are absolute critical for getting precise results. You use and to connect your main different concept groups. This narrows your search, making sure results include something from each concept. Then you use or within a concept group to include all those synonyms and related terms you found. This broadens your search for that specific concept. So your final search string might end up looking something like business or firm or enterprise, and continuity or impact or recovery, and natural disaster or flood or earthquake. It helps you get that balance between casting a wide enough net but still getting relevant stuff back. And, at this early stage, it's often better to lean towards being more exhaustive and then narrow it down later if you need to.
Okay, so with that really robust map and search string built, how do you actually go on this intellectual treasure hunt? How do you start sifting through what you find?
Right. That brings us neatly into phase 2, executing the search and doing that initial triage. Your first port of call should usually be the major electronic databases, things like Google Scholar, Web of Science, Scopus, maybe PubMed, depending on your field. And it's really important to use multiple databases. Why? Because, well, no single database indexes absolutely everything that's published. You'll miss things if you only use one.
Okay, and what's the specific deal with Google Scholar? You mentioned scrubbing it.
Yeah, Google Scholar is incredibly useful, especially for those initial broad searches. It indexes not just traditional journal articles, but also a lot of that gray literature, conference papers, theses, reports. But what makes it particularly valuable, I think, is its citation data. You can instantly see how many times an article has been cited by other papers. That gives you a pretty strong, quick clue about its potential influence and credibility in the field. High citation count usually means it's worth a look.
Right. And then there's this technique called snowballing.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing, almost like a secret handshake for researchers.
Huh. It's not secret, but it is super effective, especially once you've found a few really core, highly relevant articles to start with. It has 2 parts. First is backward searching. That means you literally go through the reference lists or bibliographies of those key papers you found. You're looking at what they cited, digging into the foundations they built on. Then there's forward searching. This uses tools, again, Google Scholar is great for this, or specialized citation indexes like Web of Science, or even tools like Connected Papers to find newer articles that have cited the key papers you already found. Connected Papers is actually amazing here. It draws these visual maps showing how papers link together. It really helps you see the conversation unfold over time.
Ah, I see. It's like following the thread of the conversation, who influenced whom, and then who picked up those ideas and ran with them.
Exactly like that. It's a powerful way to trace the lineage of ideas.
That's clever. And sometimes I guess you need to look beyond just the usual academic databases and journals.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the value of actually talking to experts in the field. They can often point you to important studies you might have missed, or just confirm you're on the right track. And definitely don't forget gray literature. We mentioned it with Google Scholar, but it's worth stressing. This includes things like government reports, PhD theses, working papers, conference proceedings. It's often crucial, especially for newer topics or for scoping reviews, because it contains ideas or findings that might not have made it into peer-reviewed journals yet. It helps you avoid publication bias.
What's publication bias again?
That's the tendency for journals to disproportionately publish studies with positive or statistically significant results, while studies with null or negative findings might never see the light of day. Including gray literature helps counter that.
Got it. Okay, so you've run your searches, you've done your snowballing, you've maybe even consulted some experts. Now you've got this potentially huge mountain of research papers. How on earth do you sift through it all without getting completely lost in the weeds? That sounds like the screening part.
Indeed. That's the screening for inclusion stage. And think of it, like using a meticulous sieve, or maybe a set of sieves. It's usually done in 2 steps. First, you use a coarse sieve. This involves quickly scanning just the titles and abstracts of everything you found. You're looking for obvious reasons to exclude articles, wrong topic, wrong population, wrong type of study. Get rid of the clearly irrelevant stuff quickly. Then, for everything that passes that first filter, you move to a more refined assessment. This means actually getting and reading the full text of the articles. And this is where your inclusion and exclusion criteria become absolutely vital. They need to be super clear, spelled out in advance, remember that protocol, and based directly on your research question. It's actually a really good idea to pilot these criteria first on a small sample of papers, just to make sure they're clear and reliable, especially if you have multiple people screening.
What kind of criteria are we talking about?
Oh, things like the publication date range, maybe only the last 10 years, the specific research methods used, maybe only experimental studies, the geographic area, the language of publication, the population studied, whatever makes sense for your question.
Okay. And what if you're looking at a title and abstract and you're just not sure? You're on the fence.
Good question. The general rule of thumb, especially at that initial title abstract screening stage, is if in doubt, include.
Yeah.
It's usually better to be a bit over-inclusive at first and potentially read a few extra full papers than to accidentally exclude something important too early. You can always exclude it later at the full text review stage if it turns out not to fit. Also, for rigor and to minimize individual bias, it's really best practice to have at least 2 reviewers screen the papers independently.
2 people looking at the same papers.
Yes, independently. Then they compare their decisions. Any disagreements get resolved through discussion, or sometimes by bringing in a 3rd reviewer to break the tie. And importantly, you need to keep a log of the papers you excluded at the full text stage, along with the specific reason why each one was excluded. That's crucial for transparency and reproducibility.
Wow, okay. This phase sounds like it demands real systematic execution. You weren't kidding about rigor. And that point about garbage in, garbage out really hits home here, doesn't it? The quality of your whole review depends on getting this search and screening part right.
Absolutely. Once you have that carefully curated pool of relevant articles, then you move into phase 3, critical appraisal, and the really exciting part, synthesis. This is where you apply the fine sieve, so to speak.
Okay, so critical appraisal. It's not enough just to find the relevant articles. You actually have to judge their quality. What does that involve?
Right. Quality assessment, or critical appraisal, is basically about evaluating how trustworthy the studies are. You look at their internal validity, which means essentially how well was the study done. Are the findings likely true for the specific people or situation they studied? Are there methodological flaws or biases that might undermine the results? And you also often consider external validity, which is about generalizability. Can the findings from this specific study reasonably be applied to other people, other settings, other times? It's not always about creating a strict yes-no cutoff, like only high-quality studies allowed. Sometimes it's more about being aware of the quality differences across the studies you've included. You might decide to give more weight in your synthesis to the findings from stronger studies, or at least acknowledge the limitations of weaker ones.
How do you actually do that assessment? Are there tools?
Yes, there are lots of tools. Checklists are very common. And there are specific ones designed for different types of research, like checklists for randomized controlled trials, for qualitative case studies, for surveys, and so on. They guide you on what methodological aspects to look for. And just like with screening, the recommendation is usually to have 2 or more researchers independently appraise the quality to ensure reliability and reduce bias.
Okay, so appraisal gets you a sense of the trustworthiness. Then comes the synthesis. This feels like where it all comes together. It's not just about what you read, but what you do with it, right? How you connect those dots and tell a new story. And you mentioned digital tools earlier. They sound like real game changers here.
Exactly. Synthesis is genuinely the art form within the literature review process. It goes way beyond just aggregation or listing what each study found. It's about integrating the ideas from different studies, often blending them with your own insights, weaving these different strands of research together to focus on the core issues, the bigger picture. It's a truly creative activity. The goal might be to produce a completely new theoretical model or a novel conceptual framework that didn't exist before. As you're reading these appraised articles, you're actively hunting for things like recurring themes or patterns in the theories used, the methods employed, the results found. You're also looking for areas of controversy, debates, or contested claims in the literature. Where do researchers disagree? And, maybe most importantly for your own contribution, you're constantly looking for those gaps. What's missing? What hasn't been studied adequately? Where are the unanswered questions?
So you're like a detective again, but this time you're not just finding clues, you're building the actual case, finding the missing pieces. Are there like specific outcomes or forms the synthesis can take?
Yeah, definitely. For example, your synthesis might lead you to propose a research agenda. You'd outline provocative, important questions for future research that directly address the gaps you identified. Or maybe you develop a taxonomy, a new way of classifying or organizing the existing research in the field. This can lay the groundwork for new theory development. A very common and valuable outcome is proposing alternative models or new conceptual frameworks. These offer genuinely fresh ways of thinking about your topic, integrating insights in a novel way. And this whole process relies heavily on critical analysis. You're not just accepting everything you read. You identify the strengths and contributions, yes, but you also have to pinpoint the deficiencies, omissions, inaccuracies, and other problematic aspects in the existing literature. That critique is how you reveal the knowledge that needs to be created or improved. It highlights the specific gap that your research is going to address.
Can you give an example? Like, how might that work in practice?
Sure. Imagine you're reviewing literature on, say, remote work. You might find one cluster of studies focusing on the benefits, flexibility, autonomy. Another cluster highlights the downsides, isolation, burnout. Your synthesis wouldn't just summarize these two sides, it might integrate them. Perhaps you propose a new conceptual model of sustainable hybrid work that explicitly outlines factors needed to balance flexibility with connection, or strategies to mitigate burnout while retaining autonomy. You've taken existing pieces, critiqued their limitations, maybe they only focused on one side, and synthesized them into something new that addresses the gap, how to make remote hybrid work truly work well. That's a real contribution.
That makes perfect sense. And those digital tools you mentioned, Research Rabbit, Connected Papers, they must be incredible for actually seeing those connections and potential gaps visually, right?
They are genuinely transformative for this phase. Tools like Research Rabbit and Connected Papers create these interactive maps of the literature. You can literally see clusters of papers, see who cites whom, spot potentially overlooked connections, or identify areas where there's surprisingly little research. It makes the landscape much clearer. They really bring to life ideas about concept mapping that researchers were writing about decades ago, but now we have the tech to do it dynamically. And there are other AI-powered tools emerging too, like Elicit, which can be amazing for extracting specific pieces of data from many papers quickly, especially if you're doing something quantitative like a meta-analysis. It can dramatically speed things up.
Wow. And just managing all those papers and references?
Yeah.
That sounds like a potential nightmare without a good system.
Oh, it absolutely would be. You need reference management software. Tools like Zotero, Mendeley, EndNote, they are completely indispensable. They let you collect papers directly from databases, organize them with tags and folders, easily insert citations into your writing in the correct style, and generate your bibliography automatically. Honestly, they save countless hours, ensure accuracy, and crucially help you avoid accidental plagiarism. You just can't do a serious review without one.
And for digging deep into the content of the papers, especially if you have a lot of qualitative stuff.
Right. For really digging into the text of many articles, especially for thematic synthesis, qualitative data analysis software, often called CAQ-DAYS, can be incredibly helpful. Tools like NVivo or ATLS.ti, they let you systematically import, manage, and code large amounts of text. You can highlight sections, assign codes or themes, write memos, and then analyze patterns across all your papers. It makes extracting those themes and concepts for your synthesis much more manageable and rigorous when dealing with volume.
Okay, so this synthesis part really demands, as one source put it, a critical, analytical, and synthesizing mind. It's about actively finding those patterns, those debates, those gaps, to really push knowledge forward. You're moving way beyond just reporting what others found. This is where your unique perspective truly starts to shine.
Exactly. And that leads us logically into the final phase, actually writing it all up.
Right. So you've done all this incredibly meticulous digging, screening, appraising, and synthesizing.
Yeah.
Now, how do you craft a compelling story out of it all? A narrative that really showcases your unique insights and highlights that all-important contribution.
Structure. Structure is absolutely key here. No matter what type of review you've done, your final report needs a clear, logical, coherent structure. This structure could be chronological, how ideas developed over time, or thematic, organized around key themes you identified, or maybe methodological, grouping studies by approach. The important thing is that the structure guides your reader clearly through the evidence, the arguments, and leads them logically to your central point, your synthesis, your contribution. Without a clear structure, even the most brilliant insights can just get lost in a sea of information.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard people say the biggest mistake is just diving into writing without a really solid plan or outline first. That sounds like a recipe for, well, just rambling.
It absolutely is. You should strongly advise outlining before you start writing the main text. It's so easy to fall into the trap of just, hammering out 5,000, 10,000 words, full of interesting details maybe, but lacking a clear narrative thread. It just becomes a data dump. A good outline forces you to think about that narrative arc. How will you introduce the problem? How will you review the existing literature to reveal the gap? How will you present your synthesis or argument? How will you conclude by emphasizing your contribution? It's the difference between just collecting information and actually building a persuasive case.
So, especially for more theoretical reviews, it's not about statistical analysis, but about the sheer logic and strength of your conceptual reasoning. That's what holds it together.
That's spot on. For theoretical work built on a literature review, your data analysis, so to speak, is replaced by logic, by clear conceptual reasoning. That's what forms the basis for your arguments and explanations. It's like the theoretical glue, as one author put it, that holds your proposed model or framework together, making it convincing and sound. Your writing needs to explicitly demonstrate how your proposed framework, your synthesis, helps to overcome those specific omissions, deficiencies, or other problematic aspects that you identified earlier in the literature. That's how you demonstrate its value.
And I guess this whole process from start to finish, it isn't always a perfectly straight line, is it? You might have to circle back.
Oh, absolutely not linear. It's highly iterative. You might get deep into reading and realize your initial research question needs refining. Or you discover a whole new set of keywords you missed. You often have to loop back, maybe do some additional searching, rethink parts of your synthesis. That review protocol we talked about way back at the beginning, it really is a living document. It needs to be flexible enough to adapt as your understanding deepens.
Right. And ultimately, this writing phase is where all that critical thinking you've done becomes truly visible to the reader. You have to clearly articulate how your reasoning connects the dots from the initial problem, through your critique of what's already known, to your proposed solution or theoretical outcome. That's what really demonstrates the rigor and the originality of your work. Wow, what an incredible journey we've covered today. From really grasping the crucial why of doing a literature review, that whole pathway from identifying the problem to pinpointing the gap to showcasing your unique contribution, to the practical steps, strategically building that precise keyword map, executing a fast but comprehensive search workflow using tools like Google Scholar and snowballing, then rigorously screening and triaging your sources based on clear criteria, moving into that critical appraisal. And finally, the really deep work, the synthesis, Not just summary, but finding themes, mapping debates, identifying methods, and crucially, spotting those gaps.
Exactly. And remembering that synthesis is about creating something new, a research agenda, a taxonomy, a new model. Then finally, carefully writing it all up, giving your work that clear structure, making sure you know what needs to be cited where, and letting your core argument, your narrative, really shine through. It's like being a storyteller, but your story is built on evidence and rigorous analysis.
Mastering this whole process really does seem to elevate you. You go from just being a passive reader of research to being an active participant, a contributor to the ongoing scholarly conversation in your field. It's about the provocativeness or fruitfulness of your work, right? Its ability to spark new ideas, new directions.
Precisely. It lets you truly see the landscape of collective evidence, understand its strengths and weaknesses, and pinpoint exactly where that knowledge frontier currently lies.
So by really seeing where all the loose ends are in what we currently know, you don't just understand the story so far. You actually gain the power to figure out, as one source put it, what needs to be done next. You get to help shape the future of knowledge itself. Which leads to a final thought for you listening. What new questions, what new gaps will your next deep dive into the literature reveal?